It is.
Yes, right here. One.
Weapon. That's sorry. Level of anxiety with that.
Honest, well, it is a level. Because it's a so it is, but it's not actually.
Got it.
All right. Are we ready to go? Are we live? We're being live streamed? Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday, December 13th, which we're going to turn into a lucky day for our Cannabis Advisory Board meeting. We are here at Hudson Valley Community College. My name is Joe Bellick. I'm chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board. I'd like to thank Hudson Valley Community College and SUNY, which shares oversight of our community colleges with local governments, for hosting us and allowing us to have our meeting here. We have a majority of board members present here in person, and also a number of voting board members joining us via live stream from various locations, including New York City. I'm going to call the meeting to order and welcome all of you who are participating in person or via the live stream, and would like to remind you that the meeting is live captioned over live stream, both English and Spanish, to individuals who are watching online. The meeting is also being recorded, and a transcript will be available on the Office of Cannabis Management website, cannabis.ny.gov. We have a full agenda today where we're going to get a presentation on the current state of the cannabis market, and perhaps most importantly, have a conversation at this CAB meeting on the number of adult use cannabis licenses, and discuss recommendations from the CAB that will inform, hopefully, that conversation. And then we'll get some updates from the Office of Cannabis Management. Okay, our first item of business is to approve the minutes from our September 24th meeting. Unless anybody has any changes or comments, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
And the second?
Second.
Thank you. Anybody opposed? Okay, the motion to approve the minutes is passed. We it's now going to be presented with an in-depth overview of the current state of the cannabis market. And then we are going to fulfill one of the statutory responsibilities of the CAB, which is to provide recommendations to the Cannabis Control Board to advise them on the number of licenses that they should issue in the adult use cannabis market using a data-driven approach. As such, we will be voting later on a motion to consider a proposed letter and formal recommendations to provide to the CCB on licensing. As we go through the meeting, keep in mind that the letter can be modified and adjusted based on the information that we're receiving today and any discussion that occurs during the meeting. And with that, I would like to turn it over to John Cagia to provide us with a presentation on the market data.
Thank you very much, Chair Bellick. Thank you, board members of the Cannabis Advisory Board. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to provide both an overview of the latest developments and trends in New York's regulated cannabis market, as well as our outlook for this market's growth. Based on the trends that we have been seeing in this market, we'll be making recommendation or proposal for the number of licenses we anticipate this market being able to support moving forward, and a recommendation of how many we anticipate should be issued as we look forward. And before we get started, I think I'd like to just make a brief comment about a lawsuit and injunction that was filed against the office yesterday that will have some implications for will have some immediate implications on the review of licenses that the office is currently considering. We are still waiting for guidance and clarification from our counsel's office on specifically which groups of applicants and stakeholders might be implicated. The office is in the process of developing and will be circulating some guidance that will be shared with our community on which groups are going to be impacted by the injunction that was issued yesterday. So please kind of look out for some communications related to that coming out later this afternoon. I'd like us to kind of go into this conversation less thinking about specifically the queues and queue orders, and this presentation we've prepared here is going to be broader than that. It's going to be a presentation more specifically about the capacity of this market. Based on the insights, data, outcomes we have seen in other legal jurisdictions, the mature markets in the West Coast, Oregon, California, Washington, etc., the newer markets that have grown very quickly in places like Oklahoma and Massachusetts. We've tried to ingest and distill and understand the developments of those regulated markets to inform the perspective of both where we are benchmarking to other jurisdictions and where we anticipate this market going over the next few years. So with all of that said, the presentation is kind of broken out into three broad chapters. The first is a current look at the size, growth, and evolution of New York's market to date, basically a bit of a year in review. The second part of this is going to be a detailed look at some of the capacity in this market currently, as well as the anticipated capacity of this market based on the commitments the office has made for licensing folks to date. And then the third is going to be a brief review of some of the outcomes we have seen in mature markets as they reach saturation and the impact of those and the impact that the maturation and saturation of those markets has had to the cannabis economies in those jurisdictions. I'd welcome this to be a discursive presentation or conversation, so please to the board members, both here and virtually joining us, please feel free to interrupt me as we go along. Happy to answer questions and provide clarification as we walk through this. So with that said, I'll begin first with just an overview of our retail sales trends. New York's market continues to grow very aggressively, and our performance to date, I think, has exceeded most expectations. November was another blockbuster month for us. I will caveat here that November was a 5-week reporting period rather than a 4-week reporting period as usual. But in November, we saw $131 million in sales reported through the end of the month, bringing the program total since sales began essentially in January 2023 to $919 million. At the rate we're going, with 4 reporting weeks left in the year, we're comfortable with the projection that we will hit $1 billion before the end of this year. And I think that's a very strong foundation for the robust opportunities we see for regulated cannabis in New York moving forward. I will also note that in the chart that you have before you, we include the number of reporting stores that send in data to us every month. You'll note that the number of reporting stores is a little bit lower than the number of officially counted open doors. And that's because there tends to be a bit of a lag between when a store gets its door open and when we start ingesting the sales reporting data into our system. Because we don't yet have the seed-to-sale system in place, the seed-to-sale system, which kind of automatically tracks transactions on the supply side and the retail side, we're expecting that to go live going to the second quarter of next year. But without that being in place, we're still dealing with a manual reporting process. And so some of our licensees take between 3 to 4 to 6 to 8 weeks between the time that their doors are open and when they've kind of dialed in their reporting in a way that we can ingest it into these reports. So there's a bit of undercounting here that we are factoring. We do not project the sales of stores who have not submitted their first reports to us, partly because the performance has been so variable across these stores. But just wanted to explain why you're seeing 215 stores open for November when we had roughly 240 operational. November's sales were partly buoyed by Green Wednesday, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which is one of the top selling sales days of the year. We had several stores report to us that on Green Wednesday, they saw double their revenue compared to a typical Wednesday. And so November's, the weekly sales for the last week of November exceeded $29 million, the biggest weekly sales that we've seen so far, and 11% week-over-week growth. And so just, fascinating to see the role that cannabis-themed holidays play in really boosting our weekly and or monthly revenue. And I will note that we do have 2 big additional sales days, cannabis sales days, as we look out to the end of the year. Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve tend to be like the 3rd, 4th, or 5th best selling days of the year. And so we're expecting to see very strong performance as we did on Green Wednesday, going to the next couple of weeks, that I think is also going to help with our strong forecast through year's end. So just to recap these sales trends, to recall, we did $160 million in total in 2023. So far in 2024, we're roughly at $760 million. Q4 sales are already at $228 million, which puts them very close to what we did in all of Q3 with 4 reporting weeks to go. And so, a very, very strong trajectory so far. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible work that our licensees have done in getting their doors open, in creating offerings and retail settings that are drawing consumers in from the unregulated market to buy New York's legal regulated products. And we're very bullish about the outlook and the future growth that's to come based on the revenue and sales data that we've seen today. Consumer demand is very strong. And this is no longer a question of whether cannabis consumers want legal product. It's really more a function of access, and we're going to be working very hard to get as many doors open as quickly as possible in the months and years to come. So with with that level set, we want to talk about a little bit about the revenue trend per store that we've seen over time. And so plotted on screen here are, on the green bars, are the number of stores that we have open and have had open each month since June of last year through November of this year. And the orange line is the average revenues that we have seen reported per store. And without kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of the specific average revenue number, I'll come back to that. I just want to kind of call out the correlation that we're seeing in New York and that we have seen in every other regulated market, which is as you open more doors, the revenue per store declines. In the first chapter of a legal market's growth, you see that the legal market is cannibalizing consumers or pulling in consumers from the illegal market. So the primary competition for the legal market is the illicit market. But as the market grows, as the map fills out, as more stores open, then you start to see kind of cannibalization start to happen between competitors in the legal market. And an easy way to think about it is if you have in a given community, say a single shop, and so a consumer is driving 2 miles to go purchase from that shop, when a second store opens that is closer to them, they're less likely to travel to that first shop, they'll start purchasing from the second one. And so you end up having this gradual shift from the primary competition of the legal operators being the illicit market, and then gradually over time, that becoming the illicit market. It's been part of the reason why we've been so focused on addressing the illicit market, and the task force has done phenomenal work related to that this year. But we want to be mindful that this is going to be a sustained trend over time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through this presentation.
John?
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you a question about that. And what you may have just answered it, but what you are sort of forecasting about the viability of some of the retail locations, like in the Woodstock, Kingston area, where I live. We went from basically 0 stores, and we now have 2 very close together, Etain, which was an RO that converted to a recreational, Domes, which is basically across the street, Catskill Mountain High, which is not too far away, and a store in Woodstock is going to be opening, I think in February. It just seems to me it's not clear to me that that size community is going to be able to support and potentially, if you include the surrounding areas, which are a little farther away, but there's a store in Rosendale, there's a couple of stores in New Paltz now. There's a lot there for not a significantly large population. So is there some concern about how that's going to impact the viability of these locations, and other than just splitting the sales up amongst the stores?
So, great question, and maybe 3 points I would say in response to that. First, the office's view is that we want this to be a robustly competitive market. The idea isn't to create kind of very exclusive zones that allow an individual or 1 or 2 operators to have full capture of the market. We want there to be competition. I think competition sharpens the businesses. It forces them to operate more efficiently. It forces them to think creatively about how to retain the competitive position. But it also benefits consumers. I think you end up getting better offerings, more competitive pricing. You end up getting a better kind of consumer experiences because people are trying to do each other to ensure they can keep the customers. The idea isn't to maintain such an aggressive control on the market, or such a constrictive control on the market, that we're not allowing there to be the sort of vibrant, rich competition that you would see in any other aspect of the consumer economy. There are some rules that are designed to kind of prevent the creation of green zones, the 1,000, 2,000 distance foot requirement. But we are encouraging licensees to be very clear about the markets they're getting into. The distancing rules, I think, are one of the elements that serve both, we believe, a public health interest, as well as some kind of competitive, it retains some competitive positioning in the market. It allows folks to develop routes. It allows the communities to understand kind of what these businesses are without being flooded. But it was never the intent that we would be so constrictive that each jurisdiction of a certain population would only have a single license. We're just encouraging folks to be very clear about where they're choosing to operate, understanding the competitive capacity for those markets, and approach their businesses with an orientation to not just where the market is, but where the market is going.
Yeah, I mean, it's just from my perspective, I think one of the stores in New Paltz is a micro that's vertically integrated, which might be a little different.
Yeah.
But 3 of the locations are driving to a parking lot next to the location. The products are not all that different. When you go in there, the brands, the selection, if the store in Woodstock opens in February, maybe a little different because people go and walk around the town. It might happen upon the store, but the other 3 or 4 of the other ones, you're driving to as the destination, basically. So it's not really clear to me what they're competing on. All the stores you walk in, they're beautiful. The customer service is great. So
And I think that's a great question. And maybe one of the things I would say, having spent quite a lot of time in high saturation or high density cannabis retail environments in other states, the product composition, the service model, and the orientation of that service model, I think all play a really meaningful difference in what the consumer experience ends up being. And in the same way, you end up having your favorite liquor store, favorite kind of pizza joint in the city that might have 4 or 5, create some of that differentiation. So I'll give a couple of examples that I've seen recently that to me underscore some of the innovative ways in which retailers in other jurisdictions have found a way to kind of separate themselves from the competition. One is a dispensary in Oregon that I visited where they spent a lot of time on their bud tender training about the science of cannabis. And so it was a PhD kind of master class on how to think about what the cannabinoid, terpenoid, flavonoid profile, how that's going to impact your experience. And presented in a very accessible way for people who didn't know cannabis. So what they ended up doing was positioning themselves as the place that you send people who don't know cannabis but are willing to try for the first time. There's a dispensary we recently visited in California where they're all about efficiency, getting you in and out as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, one of the things they've done is put most of their products out on the floor. So it's almost a grocery store model where you can go take your things off the shelf, put them in a basket, take them to the counter, rather than talking to a bud tender and having them talk to a runner who goes to the back to pull the product. For customers who know that you can get in and out in 3 minutes, the speed factor was a differentiating thing, and they've locked in the consumer who's looking for efficiency. The consumer who knows exactly what they want will get it off the shelf, will go pay for it and be gone without a lot of engagement with bud tenders or sales forces. I think there are a lot of, and then third is product differentiation. There's some California dispensaries that we visited, some in Colorado as well, who think very specifically about which communities that they're in and which products they're going to carry to serve those communities. I will say, because we are still relatively young in our market, there may have been a bit of gravitation toward kind of the same initial set of products on shelves, kind of understandable because we had a limited number and that has grown dramatically. But we have over 1,000 strains available now in New York market. We've got nearly 1,000 different brands being sold in the market. I would encourage our retailers to think expansively about brand, product mix, and the customers that you're serving, again, as a way to differentiate yourself from the market. If everyone kind of gravitates toward the middle, it becomes a less differentiated experience for the consumer, and then you start basing the choices on price. And I don't think that has to be the case. So for the retailers, both currently operational and coming, a real opportunity to think about how you're going to set yourself apart in the market. But there's a lot of opportunity to do that because it is only going to get more competitive moving forward.
Okay, John, before you continue, I apologize. I wanted to introduce and acknowledge and thank our acting executive director, Felicia Reed, for joining us at this CAB meeting. And if at any point you would like to say anything or offer any comments, please do. But we really, really appreciate you coming to the meeting and participating. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I'll let John continue, but I'll go back later.
Hello, everyone. John, thank you for everything you're saying. This is Ebro from the CAB. Hi, everyone. Just while we had having this discussion, I feel like we're saying a lot of great words right now, and it sounds awesome. But what we're dancing around is the fact that, as you could see on this chart, the more stores in the marketplace, the more it hurts the revenue per store. And it needs to be said that whom that's going to hurt the worst will be the licensees who are Black, brown, minority. And so I just want to put a pin in that, because as this discussion goes on and as we discuss the number of licensees available or that will be available in this market, we need to know we're headed the same direction that other states ended up going, like Washington, which allowed a lot of people to have licenses and a lot of stores to open. And ultimately, after a couple of years, the major corporations came in and took over a lot of those stores because licensees couldn't sustain. And so I just want to put that out there because that is what we were trying to avoid when we started this journey. We wanted to protect small businesses. We wanted to help small businesses. We wanted this market to be something that people could create and sustain and not at the end of the journey end up with all of the stores or most of the market being controlled by the rich or by the big corporations. So I just wanted to put that out there while we're at this point and looking at this chart.
Thank you, Ebro. And we'll definitely come back to that point. I've got a couple of other slides that will build on that point, both showing where I think we are going from a competitive basis in this market, as well as what we've seen in other jurisdictions that have hit that saturation point. And you're absolutely right. I think we've got some data here that shows that it has become a very challenging market dynamic in other jurisdictions. And I would urge all of our stakeholders to think deeply about that element, some of the inevitability of outcomes based on what we've seen fairly consistently in some of the mature and saturated markets. So the trend line has it that we're currently at, through at least October, roughly 454,000 per month per store. But I will also note, and you'll see it, I'll just skip over to the next slide, that there's a very wide range in revenue profiles per store. So the averages tend to get a little bit skewed by the fact that we have some outsized performers in New York. New York absolutely has some of the best performing dispensaries in the country. New York has a sophisticated consumer base. We have historically paid a premium for cannabis, and that I think has extended into our legal regulated market. We tend to have very affluent communities, which increases our spending power. And so as a function of kind of that combination, we have a very strong, we've had some very strong performers in the market currently. And it's also because it's early days. So there's some folks who've been able to open in jurisdictions where, whether because of municipal rules or because of opt-out markets, there just isn't a lot of other service there. And that's enabled them to maintain stronger performance. And so I caution about relying too heavily on the averages and rather just kind of thinking about this as a pattern of behavior where competition does tend to drive down average revenues. As it currently stands, so based on the most recent performance revenue given reported to us and future costing that out, the average store would be on a run rate of roughly $6.5 million or $6 to $6.5 million a year. That may sound like a lot. I would just urge folks to recall the unique aspects of operating a cannabis business, including the regulatory costs that make operating cannabis retail more expensive than most other jurisdictions, that make the 280E that ends up meaning that cannabis businesses, cannabis licensees will be paying anywhere from 30 to 75% of their revenues in taxes because you're not able to make the kinds of deductions that other businesses in the economy are able to make. And so the dollar earned in cannabis, the gross revenue earned in cannabis tends to go a lot less further than it would in other sectors of the economy because of some of the structural factors of this market. So I'll just call out the kind of percentile ranges that we're talking about. As this market matures, we fully expect to see revenue price compression. But like the bottom quartile are already at about $2.5 million average run rate. And the median, the midpoint between high and low is about $4 million. So the spread, there is a broad spread of performance in this market. But to Board Member Ebro's point, we do want to kind of be cognizant of if the median number is $4 million per store, then there's a lot of folks who are below that line and a lot of folks who are going to get squeezed as compression continues in the coming months. because the market has now officially been open roughly 24 months. Our first stores opened in December of 2022, and we're now in December of 24. We have a good spread of stores that have been open for a range of periods. So the bar chart on the left shows that we've got 52 stores who've been open for 10 weeks or less, 35 that have been open for 20 weeks or less, going down to 15 who've been open for 71 weeks or more. So we've got a really good kind of cross-section or mix of stores who've been open across a stretch of time. And one of the things that we have seen that I think is a positive here is that stores generally continue to grow their revenues over time. And so the average revenues across most of our producers, particularly who are in this early cohort of been open for less than 40 weeks, and most folks have been able to continue growing their revenues 4, 5, 6 months after they have grown. So it's generally not that the revenues you're making in week 2, week 3 will be where your revenue is going to be capped. As I said earlier, because we are still pulling in a lot of consumers out of the illicit market, partly because we're shutting down illicit stores, partly because consumers have shown strong interest in purchasing from the legal market, there's opportunity here. But one of the things we are seeing is that the rate of growth amongst the stores who are opening now is a little bit lower than for the stores that opened a year ago. Again, that kind of makes sense because the map is more crowded now, there's more stores open, the competition is more intense. So the 2 points here I'm trying to make are, one, because we have a number of stores, because we've got a cross-section of stores that have been open across this entire period, it's enabling us to group these licensees in cohorts and to see how the revenue trend was for people who opened 18 months ago versus those who opened 6 months ago. And one of the things that we're seeing is that on average, as you can see on the right, that the trend line shows a fairly consistent pattern of growth over the time period that we're looking at. I will just note that we are seeing that the rate of revenue growth, the starting point is lower, and the point at which it plateaus is also lower for people who are opening more currently versus those who've been open or who opened first. So the people who entered the market first. Because there was very little competition at the time, as they stayed a longer period of ramp before they started to plateau.
Hey, John, this is June Chen. I have a quick question. Do you have
Sure.
that broken down by region in New York? This trend that you're seeing?
By region within the state,
Within the-
yes, we do. We didn't include it here for a couple of reasons. The data was still a little bit messy, but I will say this about the regional analysis, Dr. Shen. One is that we are definitely seeing some variability in performance across the different regions. And some of that is population-based and cost profile-based. But two, I would also say that I'd be cautious about looking purely at revenues as a determinant of how businesses are doing. So I'll use the example of 2 different kind of jurisdictions here. A licensee in Manhattan may be doing, say, $5 million on a run rate of $5 million per year, and that feels like a big number. Versus, and these are not big hard examples; these are just illustrative. Licensee in Manhattan may be doing $5 million a year in average revenue versus, say, licensee in the Mohawk Valley who may be doing $2.5 million. On its face, you might be compelled to say that the licensee in Manhattan is doing better than the licensee in the Mohawk Valley. However, if you look at the operational cost basis, the licensee in Manhattan may be paying $60,000 a month in rent. The licensee in the Mohawk Valley might be paying $5,000. And so that delta in their cost profile, the cost of operating their business in those 2 different jurisdictions, might actually mean, when you look at the gross and net revenues for those 2 businesses, the licensee in the Mohawk Valley might actually be taking home more than the one in Manhattan because the operational cost basis is so much lower. So just flagging that is one of the reasons why the looking just at the top line revenue numbers at the regional basis isn't definitive, because we are seeing really wide variability, and particularly in rent is one of the highest line items of cost for these businesses.
Thank you. That makes sense, the variabilities. Thanks.
I'll also note just a point about the enforcement efforts of the state and our other government, both state and municipal partners over the last 6 months or so. First, just a massive shout out to the enforcement unit for leading the illicit cannabis enforcement task force, which began in May and has had really meaningful impact on the revenues and the performance of our licensees. Between the enforcements of the state task force and our municipal partners, we've padlocked well over 1,000 stores across the state, and we've seized nearly $50 million worth of illicit product just during the task force enforcement period. We've seized over $110 million of product across the illicit enforcement period total. And it's been a great deal of work, but the team has done it with aplomb. I will also say, just in alignment with our social equity and kind of mission not to recriminalize kind of individuals, we have been successful in criminalizing the businesses that are selling these unregulated products, but we've had almost no arrests coming out of this. So we're criminalizing the businesses, not the individuals, and I think that's a testament to a program that is unique in the country in achieving this very impressive outcome without ending up having to kind of lock up a new cohort of folks for cannabis offenses. Third, the illicit cannabis enforcement work, the task force, has had a meaningful impact on the revenues being earned by our licensees. So statewide, we've seen over a 50% increase in revenues across all of the licensed businesses that were open before the task force work began. I will note that there's a bit of a delta between in performance and revenue impact in the upstate versus downstate dispensaries, partly because we've had such, because the city in particular, the sheriff's office had such an important role in padlocking locations downstate. So the number of locations that have been padlocked downstate because of the efforts by the NYPD, by the sheriff's office, was a big boost for the number of locations that have been padlocked downstate. But and that's part of the reason why we're seeing a greater post-enforcement drift downstate versus upstate. But all of our licensees seemingly benefited from this. Everyone who was open before the task force work began saw their revenues rise after these stores got padlocked, and we remain fully committed to continue these enforcement actions until all of these illicit shops have been addressed. So the work goes on. It has been a massive undertaking to this point, but it is far from over.
Hey, John, it's Nikki.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So obviously, major kudos to the task force. There's been a noticeable difference, particularly in the city, of shops being shut down. But in light of the court decision around sheriff enforcement, I personally have noticed some folks are starting to creep back in who are operating without a license, and was curious if you had some insight into how you think that's going to potentially impact, or if it's going to be net neutral because of the work of the task force.
So I think first I'll flag that the court case kind of applied to the work being done by the city, not by the state's task force. So the state's work continues apace and is not implicated by that decision. Two, well, we're obviously paying very close attention to this, and I'm not in a position to speak about pending legal matters. I will say that we remain unequivocally committed to continuing to do this work, to protect public health, to protect public safety, and to protect the performance of our legal market. And so hear you that there may be some opportunists who might be seeking to capitalize on what they think might be a slowdown here, but we are not slowing down as a state, and we're going to continue to do this work until the job is done.
Thanks, John. So I will make sure that as I'm seeing folks pop up, that I'm making sure I'm filing that anonymous report. So maybe a good time to plug that that link.
I was just about to do that. Thank you for bringing that up. And so I would continue to urge the members of our community, our licensees, and all of our stakeholders to let us know as you're seeing these unlicensed businesses in your communities. If you go to ocm.ny.gov, the state's website, there's an incident reporting form at the bottom of our landing page, where you can report an illicit business, give us an address, you can upload photos, and that ensures that it is on our radar and helps us prioritize where we're going to be targeting our efforts. So ocm.ny.gov, file an incident report that enables us to know who is kind of operating in an unregulated way in your community, and that enables you to ensure that we have that information and so that we can pursue these cases. I would also say that on ocm.ny.gov, on our website, we have the list of all of our licensed regulated businesses. So if you're also not sure about whether somebody's operating legally or not, you can find a licensed dispensary list on our website. It'll give you the address, their website, and enable you to engage with them as well. So thank you for letting me give that plug. To Dr. Chin's earlier question about the upstate downstate split, or the municipal to the revenue splits that we're seeing by municipality. Here we're showing them upstate, downstate. I will note that we have them at the regional level, but showing here the point which I kind of tried to speak to a little bit earlier. So first, the main blue boxes, the one on the left is upstate, the one on the right is downstate, and the average revenues we're seeing reported by these two cohorts. Again, average is 5 million versus 6.5 million downstate. Through the middle of the bars, you get to see a bit of comparison there between the 25th percentile, basically the lower quarter, the 50th percentile, the midpoint, and the 75th percentile, which is the upper performing cohort. And maybe just to underscore the fact that we are seeing such a wide diversity of performance across our licensees. The lower quartile upstate is currently reporting a roughly less than $1 million run rate. The bottom quartile downstate is reporting roughly $1.6 million. The performance of the outsized performance of the top cohort may be masking the fact that we have this really broad spread, and there are some folks who are kind of already on the lower end of this. And so that's something to think about as we think about the future competitive intensity of this market. One point I would make to all of our licensees is, and I'll continue to make this point, plan for where this market is going, not where it currently is. Focus on the efficiency of your operations so that you can kind of generate and sustain your revenues, or keep as much of your revenue or your operating capital as long as possible. But two, as the board considers the licensing recommendations here, to be kind of cognizant of the fact that our top performers are not necessarily, and particularly the top performers who have been quite public about their performance to date, are not necessarily indicative of the broader climate in the market. If no questions on that, sorry, this is a bit of an eye chart, but we wanted to show the bars on the left. The two bars show how many stores we have open either upstate or downstate. And the drift we're seeing is, after it being about a 1-to-1 ratio for the first chapter of growth, over the last couple of months, we've seen a big push for stores to open upstate. So we've got a little over 110 stores open upstate compared to about 90 open downstate. And something to think about as we kind of contrast the number of stores open versus the population served. And I'll just quickly walk through this. So far in 2024, we've had roughly 65 stores upstate serving around 130,000 people versus 55 stores downstate serving 203,000 people. So basically, there's more people per store downstate than there has been upstate. That asymmetry is going to be maintained even as we look out at future licensing. So if we account for the number of locations that are currently receiving proximity protection, so we're using that as a proxy of places that are guaranteed to open. We have currently 556 stores, locations on the map being protected upstate, and that's going to be about 15,000 people per protected location. Downstate, it's about 450 stores, 450 locations being protected, and 25,000 people per store. That's just a function of what we have received currently to date as locations where people want to operate, and suggests that there might be a higher retail density upstate than there is downstate as we go into the next season. I will note, now that we have a robust cohort of licensees that have their doors open, we are 263 officially now, which is just blockbuster. We have enough data to actually start providing regional level analysis, these breakouts by region. We weren't able to do that to this point because in the regions where we may have only had 1 or 2 stores, our concern was that if you report that, then it becomes really easy to figure out who is earning what. But as we move forward, you will be getting from us more detailed regional breakdowns, and the regional licensing questions are one of the things that we're looking forward to seeding as a conversation now, but something that will be an ongoing point of analysis moving forward.
Hey, John, I have
Yeah.
a quick question. Sorry, let me get this microphone. This number all the way at the bottom on the population served by proximity protected locations.
Mhm.
So is what you're saying upstate currently, if all of the proximity protected locations open, each store on average is gonna only have 15,000 people to serve? Is that what
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Is that 21 and older?
Yes.
What was
No,
that?
actually, no, that's just straight population.
Okay, just straight population,
Yeah.
right, not 21 and over. So it has always been my, I guess, understanding, whenever I've looked at different business models and pro formas for a store, you need about 20,000 people to actually operate something that is profitable. Have you guys looked at that base number of population per store that is needed?
Yes, we have. So I think this is where there's been some divergence in the revenue performance and the population served by store by market. There has been some variability there. And at least based on the data that we're seeing out of New York, I think our tolerance is going to be higher than it might have been in other jurisdictions for that. But Alan, I think the point you're making is correct, which is that even just based on the 1,000+ locations that are currently receiving proximity protection, we are looking at a competitive market, no question about that.
Okay, cool. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I agree. And this actually, to your question, Alan, actually shows how that distribution is going to look across the state. So we have here the ESD regions plus Manhattan and the boroughs, showing in green the lower part of these bars the number of stores that are currently open, and in orange the number of stores that have been proposed based on the number of places that are receiving proximity protection. There are some places like Mid-Hudson, where there's 79 locations that are receiving proximity protection, a couple of others like Queens and Western New York, where you've got nearly 60 places receiving protection. And then more modest estimates for places like Central New York, North Country, Mohawk Valley, and Staten Island, where they're lower population areas, and as a function of that, fewer stores expected to open. Generally, there is some correlation between a ESD region's population and the number of places that are currently receiving proximity protection. I will also note that one of the factors here is also things like the opt-out regions where, there ends up being some gravitation towards some jurisdictions versus others based on the number of municipalities within an ESD region that opted in versus opted out of having cannabis businesses in their boundaries. But flagging that, we have our 261 locations currently open, but many, many more to come. And these are at least the ones that have already been signaled to us and that have received a pin on our proximity protection map.
And I think it's, this data confirms the point I was making earlier anecdotally. If you just look at the Mid-Hudson region and the number of potential locations and the population, it's, I'm glad that you're getting this data out, John. And I think it's important that people who are planning to open a retail location understand the playing field. People have a right to open a business, and if they have a license and, meet the requirements, but they should be going into it with their eyes open, and it's their livelihoods and investments. And the more information like this we can get out there, the least people can make informed choices about what they want to do.
I think that's a critical point of this exercise, Chair Belloc, is we think it's critically important for people to understand the competitive dynamics that they're going to be facing in this market. I will also point kind of the inverse of the point there. If the Mid-Hudson is clearly looking like it's going to be a high saturation area, Long Island is one of the anomalies as a high population area that has very few proposed locations. And that's partly as a function of the kind of the municipal zoning rules and the opt-outs that we're seeing in Long Island, which is making it very difficult for licensees, applicants to find qualifying locations. And so a very modest number of stores being forecast currently, roughly 50 locations 55 locations being pinned on Long Island, a jurisdiction that could clearly support a lot more than that, but people just can't find a place to open up their doors.
Well, that's, I guess, goes back to Dr. Chin's question about the regionality and why those Long Island stores are doing so well, and they're kind of, weighing your numbers in a certain direction.
Yes.
Just because of that.
I
right
mean,
there.
ironically,
Yeah.
what's happening in Long Island, which is not happening other places, may actually be making the locations there more successful than the ones in other parts of the state.
Yeah. It's been part of the reason why we've been calling out this issue of the top performers, particularly top performers who can crow about the numbers, shouldn't be our reference point for the average or aggregate performance of most folks. I think the operators in Mid-Hudson would be reporting a very different story.
Well, I know you have more to go through, but just in terms of the discussion we're going to have later on about the number of licenses, I think this information is critically important to inform what we're doing and recommendations we make to the Cannabis Control Board, because I think we can see very clearly what a large increase in the number of licenses, what the impact is going to be. We're getting more and more information, be able to have more and more data about to inform the number of licenses and the steps forward with that. So anyway, did you on?
And maybe just quickly to that point, we've been working very hard to build systems that would enable us to report these data out more consistently moving forward, or more readily moving forward. It's taken us a little while to get that infrastructure done, but as part of the process for developing this presentation for you, for the CCB, and for our stakeholders, it's given us a referential template that we'll be able to use to provide updates on this moving forward.
And the CCB has been provided the same information that we're getting?
Yes. So the next part of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the market growth outlook. So we've provided a kind of referential base on where we are so far. The next phase is going to be, or the next chapter of this is going to be about the growth of the market as we expect to see it, both from a consumer standpoint as well as from an industry and operational capacity standpoint. So first is, I think we should all kind of appreciate the fact that demand for cannabis in New York is rising. Over the last decade or so, we have seen the number of people who report consuming cannabis increase by 30%, from 14 to nearly 19%. The number of people who report consuming in the past month, so what we would consider more frequent users, has increased to 12.5%. So we're basically saying that at this point, 1 in 10 consumers, 1 in 10 New York adults, people over the age of 18, are consuming at least once a month. The idea or the truth that New Yorkers are consuming more regularly over time is important to understand, because the growth of this market isn't just going to be exclusively the transition of consumers from the unregulated market to the legal market. It is also going to be the increase of people who have never consumed before, who are consuming for the first time. And there's some specific groups there that we've seen over the last few years that have contributed to that. We've seen significant increase. In fact, nationally, we've seen some of the fastest growth rates of demand amongst adults over the age of 65. We've seen demand increase significantly amongst women. And so generally, this used to be a very asymmetrical market, with younger men being the largest cohort and women being significantly less likely to consume. We're almost getting to the point where there's gender parity in usage, even though men tend to consume more than women. And we should also be cognizant of the fact that there's going to be this is a significant generational change. There are going to be young adults who are coming of age for the first time in American history, where cannabis is as legal as alcohol, and who are going to be assessing the kind of the effect of alcohol versus the effect of cannabis. And generally, I think we're seeing greater acceptance of and preference for cannabis amongst consumers. The idea that you can consume cannabis and not wake up with a hangover the next day, the idea that you can use cannabis in a lot of different contexts based on the breadth of experiential profiles that are possible with the plant, I think suggests to me that we're going to see a very significant generational change over time, over the next few years. So demand is growing by 2 vectors. We're capturing consumers from the illicit market, but there's also this new cohort of folks who are going to be coming into this market. I will flag, because we almost get this question immediately when we say that the demand is rising, that we are not seeing a corresponding increase in usage rates by minors. So we've been tracking underage use for a long time. Obviously, as a public health priority, this is a really important issue for us. On the chart that you have on screen, New York is in blue, the country is in orange. And I think it's worth noting that, kudos to our public health teams and the messaging that we're doing, the work we're doing, trying to ensure that young people don't use or consume these products. But the numbers have been largely flat over the last decade, and we're working very, very hard to at least keep it that way, if not bring them down. And so the adoption rate is happening amongst adults. It is based on these data not happening amongst young people, which I think is a great public health outcome, and one that we will remain singularly focused on. But I think that is worth addressing, because I just don't want there to be confusion about the impact of legalization on driving higher underage use. So as with that consideration, knowing that demand is going to be growing across 2 vectors, growing based on capture of the legal market versus growing based on ingress of new consumers, we've built out a legal market growth forecast based on the outlook for this market. Consensus estimates based on economists who've been working on this for a while are that New York is roughly a $6.5 to $7.5 billion market. That's how much consumers are already spending on cannabis in New York. There's a huge amount of money being spent on cannabis in New York, and that number is going to grow over time because of the ingress of the groups I mentioned. It is going to take a while for all of that demand to be captured by the legal market, and the reason for that is one, a function of access. Consumers aren't going to drive 500 miles to their closest dispensary if there's other sources that they have already been using for many years that are down the street, that are in the neighborhoods, that are in the communities. And so what we're showing on screen here is a fairly aggressive growth outlook that suggests that we're starting right now. This year, we're going to be on pace for roughly $900 million, a little bit less than $1 billion in sales, $1 billion over the first 2 years. And at the rate that we have been growing so far, and based on the growth rates we have seen in other jurisdictions, we can estimate maybe a $2.5 billion market by next year, going up to well over $3 billion, going to $4 billion by 2026, and starting to plateau as we get to that $5.5 billion number. Several factors will influence how high or will influence the specific numbers that these will end up netting out at. But I think we're fairly comfortable that at maximum kind of competitive intensity, peak saturation, New York should be able to capture, $5.5 to $6.5 billion in legal revenue. And between now and the end of the decade, we will have collected over $30 billion in sales in the legal market. Very significant opportunity in this market. Demand is growing. The number of stores that will serve that demand is the question that we're here to solve. We expect that New York can support a lot more stores than we currently have open. The question is going to be how many of those licenses to issue and how quickly those licenses are going to get out. But we wanted to underscore that there's a lot more demand to be served to come. That demand largely already exists. This is not about creating new consumers. The bulk of the demand we're going to be serving through the end of the decade is going to be people who are already buying cannabis. New York's legal market creates a very compelling value proposition for consumers. We've got some really kind of compelling, some very exciting products in the market, some very New York-centric, New York-relevant brands available. And so the work over the next few years is going to be to ensure that the state's legal market's value proposition is sufficient to draw consumers from the unregulated market into the legal market. And the second part of our role is to try and get as many doors open as possible to serve this robust demand in a way that doesn't create some of the unintended or undesirable outcomes that we may have seen in other jurisdictions, trying to strike that balance. To the point that Ebro raised a little while ago about the revenue compression that we see as more stores open. So this is a model that is based on what we have seen in other jurisdictions about how the average revenue reported per store compresses as you open more stores. Based on the growth forecast that we've developed for New York, we're basically saying, last year the average store is doing about 6.5 million. This year, the average store is probably going to be reporting or be on a run rate for about 5.5 million. As we start opening more stores and as we transition from the stores competing primarily or principally against the illegal market to the stores primarily competing against each other, then that price compression starts to happen and starts to happen pretty quick. So we're forecasting that if you split that $6.5 billion revenue by 2030 across, say, 2,400 stores open, then it's math. Each store's average revenue is going to have fallen from 5.5 million to 2.5 million. Now that's the average number, which means a significant number of people will be performing well below that, because we've seen here that the averages tend to be higher because you've got some outsized performers the averages tend to be high because of the outsized performers. So at 2.5 million being the average, it means that there'll be a substantial cohort of folks who are coming in well below that. And if you're a Manhattan-based location with $60,000 in rent, if you're generating less than $1 million in revenue, that's a very difficult operating position to be in, just speaking plainly. So this is not to necessarily say that the market will support 2,400 stores, but it is to show what happens if we were to open 2,400 stores with the level of demand that we see, that the average revenue per store is going to decline. You could almost mask the numbers here, and the principle would remain true, that with every new store you open, the average revenue per store starts to decline. So based on this model, assuming the state was even able to support 2,400 open doors based on some of the regulatory requirements, we would be expecting to see approximately a 60% decline in average reported revenue per store over that period.
I mean,
John.
I don't think you can underscore this point enough. And the previous slide, slide 21, which says, $6 billion and $30 billion. It reminds me of a television ad that says, there's $30 billion available. And when you contact them, there's $30 billion available, but your piece of it is $150, and I'm not saying you shouldn't put these numbers out, but the high level headline should not be that there's $30 billion of money out there to be made, or $6 billion. People should understand what's going to happen as more and more stores open, both for the reasons that Ebro's mentioning, and also so the market grows in appropriate measured way. We're stewards for this, and the CCB is a steward for this. And if it's not done in a thoughtful, measured way, a lot of people are going to put their life savings and resources at risk. I just wanted to underscore that point, because when you see a number like 30 billion or 6 billion, it's very easy for people to think, oh, there's, all I got to do is open a store and everything's going to be fine.
Joe, taking it a step further, I think we need to be more deliberate yet again. I believe this will be politicized by the major corporations that want to be in this market, and they may just run with the headline you just said. And as we've seen on multiple occasions when it comes to corporations and even government, not protecting the small business owner or the consumer for, reasons of financial and political gains is something that continues to occur. So we can't act like history won't repeat itself here. And so then you have to ask the question, if we are going to make this information transparent, shouldn't we also be making it even more detailed in the sense of what is the exact average cost for running a store with all of the fees and all of the things? Because, many people will see numbers like a few $1 million and still be, bullish about going out and trying to attempt to get into this marketplace. Which we don't want to deter people from wanting to have their dream of opening a store, but I also want to protect against major corporations coming in and decimating this market and people not being able to have a store at all, or a marketplace that's viable for small individual mom and pop, Black, brown, women, etc. Store owners and operators. So I think we need to be on the offensive here in some way, shape, or form. I also have to assume that Governor Kathy Hochul and her interests, which seem to be aligned more with corporations based on what I'm reading, she's going to use this as well. The same way they've tried to act as if, us being slow to market with licenses wasn't partly controlled by them and their inability to get us staff, infrastructure and things that needed to expedite some of the licenses in the beginning. And also the lack of support for shutting down illegal stores in the beginning, which many requests were made and no support was given until it was politicized. So I think we have to take all that into account. And this, as we've discussed, I see a lot of new faces here and people who are new here. We've been having this discussion since day one. This isn't new. We knew this was coming. We knew it was going to be politicized, and we knew there was going to be pushback from major corporations. So what are we going to do?
Well,
John, do you have information about the cost of opening and operating a store that you share or could be shared with potential licensees?
yes.
And Chair
maybe
Bellick, Chair Bellick, we have some questions here in New York.
In New York City?
Yes.
Okay.
Fair.
Look, can we have John just answer that question about the cost, and then anybody who has questions in New York City will entertain?
Yes, two quick points. One is, I'd also like to kind of hat tip out to our academy, a contractor that's been working with the state to provide training and resources for our licensees. And one of the things that they have done that I think they've done a phenomenal job on is building pro formas to help people understand realistically how both the cost of operating a business and how revenue is likely to trend over time. Two, we can work to build kind of a average pro forma that allows folks to clearly see where the money goes as these revenues are being billed. And to kind of clarify something I said earlier, Chair Bellick, this presentation as it is being done has not been presented yet to the CCB. The intent was to use the conversation being had here today to refine, to improve, to build upon, to solicit your feedback, so that when we're presenting the full presentation to the CCP, it accounts for both the places where the CAB believes that we should be kind of either providing more data, providing more supporting documentation, and to ensure that the CCB has the fullest view possible. So this specific presentation has not yet been presented, but it will be.
Okay. Well, maybe at a future CAB meeting, you could give us a few slides on the operational costs so that we can understand it, but also help highlight it for potential licensees or people who are thinking of going into the market.
We can certainly do that.
I also did want to say that I think the governor is very supportive of the small business retail locations and the social equity mission. And in conversations leading up to this meeting, I think they understand a lot of the concerns that Ebro and others are raising, and in conversations that I've had, and I know Pete and Alan have also had, I think have underscored some of the same concerns that Ebro is raising. So I'm going to turn it over to New York City.
Thanks,
Anybody
Chair.
there have questions
Yes.
or comments?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Yes,
Yes.
we can
Okay,
hear
yeah.
you. Yes.
Good. So John, it's Nikki. I have a clarifying question and then a follow-up question related to this. So first, the clarifying question, right? So when you say new stores, right, that means brand new licensees are opening location 1, or does that also include what the MRTA allows, which folks to operate 2 and 3 locations 2 and 3? So that's clarifying question 1. And then second question is, obviously, delivery licenses haven't yet been announced or issued, and those licenses, right, were intended in the MRTA to go for folks who qualify for C. So how does the delivery license apply in context of retail, right? Because essentially they're same, but different. So how are you also viewing the role of delivery licenses as we're thinking about stores and the quantity of stores that the market can sustain?
Thank you, Nikki. So a couple of thoughts on that. First, we are treating each store as an independent location, regardless of what structure it's operating under. So whether it is a licensee that has received 3 licenses and is permitted to operate 3 stores versus whether those 3 stores are being operated by 3 independent operators. For us, the net effect on customer service ends up being the same. So at least here, we're not making a distinction between whether it is a single entity that has received 3 separate operating licenses versus 3 entities that have received 3 independent licenses. 2, on actually both delivery and on consumption, which is another vector by which demand will be served. I would view kind of this idea of store under all 3 of those umbrellas. So because all of them are serving demand in different ways. Now, consumption, let me set aside for now, but delivery, particularly in some jurisdictions, and we've seen this used very effectively in other markets where people have opened delivery operations that serve opt-out municipalities. Delivery can be a very kind of robust way in which to serve consumer demand in places where retail access is not permitted. So we think that's going to be an opportunity there. Again, here we're not talking about the type of license or the cube. It's simply about how many kind of operational businesses are there that are serving each customer. And as you increase the number of vectors by which consumers can purchase cannabis, you necessarily reduce the amount of revenue those businesses are going to be able to earn because of the competitive element. Consumption is going to be a little bit different. And we would kind of maybe draw the analog between the bar versus the carry out or the package store. There's going to be a subset of demand that will be served by consumption once consumption in whatever form it ends up going live is active. But we just want to flag that there's a subset of the demand that would have been served by retail that is also going to be captured by consumption. And so that introduces an additional competitive dynamic. For purposes of this exercise, the number of assumptions that would need to be made to calculate the precise impact of a license that doesn't even exist yet on demand, I think would be too much of a stretch. What we were trying to show, and I don't want to kind of get too hamstrung on the specific numbers, but what I wanted to show is just this general relationship we have consistently seen across every regulated market, that as you increase the number of stores, the revenue per store declines. You may still be able to maintain a certain number of very high performers in the market, but on average, those revenues will decline on average. Does that answer the question?
It does. I'm just thinking a little bit in terms of, right, like, for example, like opt-out, you mentioned municipalities that opt out, right? So right now, like folks on Long Island are doing quite well. So I'm just trying to process inevitably when delivery does open, right? That's obviously going to have a retail sale impact. So I'm just processing, but I appreciate all the clarifications, John.
Sure. So with this kind of macro level view on revenues and potential stores and kind of the interplay between those dynamics, I'll give a quick snapshot on our product landscape, because I think this is also going to be informative as you think about production and supply and the future of retail in New York. So based on our sales data from the beginning of November, we've seen what has been a continued shift, a continued drift over the last 12 or so months, where when we first launched flower sales, so loose flower and pre-rolls made up a little more than half of our total sales. And over time, that has started to fall a little bit, partly because non-flower sales have started to do really well in this market. That's a function of when we first launched, there was a lot of, there was a limited number of value-added products. The edible landscape was fairly limited. There were a more limited number of, say, vaporizers, disposable vapes, tinctures, topicals, etc. And over the last 12 months, we've seen very strong growth in the number of value-added product companies in the space, diversity of brands, diversity of product options. And so as a result of that, the share of flower, it remains the largest category at 45%, flower and pre-rolls. But just noting that you're seeing flower has now fallen below that 50% mark, and vaporizers are 28%, edibles at 14% are pretty strong categories. A second point, and Chair Bellick, we've talked about this episodically, pre-rolls continue to be a very strong category in New York. Both pre-rolls that are being sold just as flower products, as well as pre-rolls that are being sold that are infused with kief or concentrates, two very strong performing product categories in New York. I think the convenience factor has been strong, and so those are high performing categories, and we expect that to sustain. As we think about the future growth of demand in New York, we expect that flower will remain the biggest category, but we will see progressively the share of flower fall over time. So by the time we're getting to 2030, the share of flower may have fallen to about 40% is what kind of our modeling assumes. But we are accounting for this drift that is happening as the value-added landscape becomes more sophisticated. We've got some really cool products that are either in the pipeline or hitting our shelves now. On the edibles side, I was looking at some of our retail sales data, and just on the kind of cooking-based, kitchen-based products, we have maple syrup, olive oil, ghee, sugar, all now as things that you can buy and mix into your products. And so these are categories that consumers are engaging with that are starting to gain share. The share of market is still quite small, but I think an indication of the diversity that is increasingly coming online. And Chair Bellick, to your point about—
You're going to lecture me about what a chillum is again?
Oh God, no.
Okay.
I certainly wouldn't do that again. But to your point about ways in which retailers can differentiate themselves, I can totally understand the reflex to just kind of gravitate toward the known names, but I would urge our product purchase managers to think very clearly about some of the incredibly rich, diverse products that are available in the market that might serve as a competitive differentiation opportunity in an increasingly competitive retail space.
I think it's good we remind people who may be using some of the products that John is mentioning, like maple syrup or things like that, to be careful. So they're not always easy to measure. And people put syrup on their pancakes like I do. They may need to take a couple of days off. But I got a call from a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me if I could teach them how to roll a joint with some flower they had purchased from one of our dispensaries. And I said I could do that, or you could go buy a pre-roll, which is readily available at many of the retail locations. So I think it's good to remind people that there are a lot of options and new and exciting products coming on the market all the time. And people should try them and see what they like, but also be careful. So
Start low and go slow.
yes, low and slow. It's like smoking meat, low and slow.
The maple syrup and then add regular maple syrup.
Read the labels. All credit to our packaging, labeling, and marketing advertising rules. The dosing should be very clearly indicated on every package that we have. So while it can be tasty and delicious, please read the label on how much is supposed to be served in a single serving.
All right.
So building off this conversation about flower, I thought it's really important that we also understand where the flower in our market is coming from, because flower is a primary product category that we have. So we currently have 5 registered organizations that are selling flower, branded flower products in our adult use market. They're allowed to do that under their license authorization. The ROs currently account for 23% of our sales in our adult use dispensaries. So these are registered organization brands that are being sold in retail dispensaries. And we are seeing a fairly significant kind of distinction between the way the RO share of sales versus the AUC, adult use cultivator share of sales. In that, the part of the strategy I think here has been through the focus on larger package sizes. The ROs have been able to capture a very significant share of flower sales. So there's looking at the table below the pie chart, which I hope you can see, when you look at the 3.5 gram, the eighth, the 7 gram, the quarter, or the 14 gram, the half, eighths roughly priced on parity on average. At the 7 gram and 14 gram, the RO product is slightly more expensive, being positioned as a premium product. The ROs have indoor production, and we've noticed quite a number of products being sold as indoor grown. But where the real distinction happens is on the larger package sizes, where at the ounce level, the RO product is priced significantly more affordably than ounces being produced by the AU cultivators. And as a result of that, 41% of the flower being sold by the ROs is happening at that ounce size or more. You can see that on the bar chart on the right, compared to just 5% of the AUC product being sold at the ounce size or more. So worth noting that ROs do have a significant share of market thus far, and that's kind of one of the considerations that I think it's important for our stakeholders to be aware about as we think about production and operational capacity in this market.
John, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Right now, there are 18 approved ROs with the new approvals last month. Each one of those is approved up to 100,000 square feet of indoor canopy. So that puts us at 1.8 million square feet of indoor canopy. This is a big number for one license type that only has 18 licenses to have a share of that level of market. Of those 18, how many are actually growing flower and getting it to market currently?
So fair question, Alan. Currently, only 5 are selling product into the AU market, and none of them are producing at maximal capacity yet. In fact, most of them are well below half of their operational capacity right now.
So I think this underscores Ebro's concern with this part of the market. And with the clarification to Alan, this is going to get worse over time.
Well,
Because the square footage is going to increase. The RO square footage of growing is going to increase. If you're saying 5 of the 18 or only 5 of the 18 are open and the 5 are not at maximum capacity, they're going to be producing more and more and more going forward.
Realistically, it is not our expectation that all 18 are going to end up producing, are going to end up setting grows, and that those who are operating are going to end up operating at maximal capacity. I think there's a lot of analysis being done by all of our licensees on market growth outlook, anticipated demand capacity, and how to prevent some of the very challenging outcomes that I'm going to show here momentarily that we've seen in other jurisdictions. And one of the ways you preserve value in this market is by not flooding the market with product that ends up cutting the knees out from everyone. So yes, there is a lot of theoretically kind of issued capacity, but I would caution that I don't expect that this is capacity that's going to be all fully activated anytime soon, simply because there are limits to what the market will be able to support.
This is Tabitha from New York City. I also just want to chime in with what John shared. What we see right now amongst the 9 operating ROs is that they too specialize, even though they are under the statute authorized for all activities across the supply chain. We see that some grow, others don't, right? We see that some process while others don't. So there is some degree of specialization that we anticipate will continue and with the new entrants. I also want to correct the record. There are 9 operating ROs and 7 newly registered ROs. So for a total of 16, we do not have 18 for the record.
And then what is the capacity? Is there a capacity of ROs that will ever meet?
Sorry,
can
could you
repeat the
please
question?
repeat the question?
I said, is there a max capacity of ROs? Like, how many of these are we gonna approve?
Right, so we received 10 RO applications. We have processed 7 of them thus far, and those have gone before CCB this fall. It's also worth noting that not all of these ROs are MSOs, right? Some of them have presence in other states. Some of them have operated at scale. Others of these newly entered ROs are small operations within New York State who have focused, for example, on medical, who have experience serving patients, not in cannabis, but in other healthcare industries, and are bringing that expertise over. So again, there is a discussion that remains to be had around what position all of them will take in the AU market, if at all, and what they intend for their specialization to be both at scale and also within the sector.
But we don't have a max capacity number.
The application period has closed. We received 10 applicants. At this point in time, we don't anticipate opening that application again.
Got it. And so we also don't have say-so on what they decide they want to do, correct? We have no, if they decide to change course or change their business model or change their focus, we have no say-so on that, or do we?
For some of the activities that the ROs want to participate in, they do have to go before the board.
Got it.
Can I ask 2 questions? The RO grows are mostly indoors,
Correct.
and the non-RO grows are mostly outdoor.
Outdoor mixed light, green.
Mixed light,
greenhouse,
yeah.
Okay, so okay, and in terms of the ownership of the ROs, is there any diversity in the ownership as far as we know?
Sorry, Chair Bella, can you repeat that question?
Is there any diversity in the ownership of the ROs?
Oh, definitely. A number of the 10 are minority-owned majority and women-owned majority.
Second 10, not the first.
Of the new cohort.
Yeah, no, I understand.
One of the points I think is worth also underscoring, and this is informed by perspective from some of the retailers that we went to see while at the Cannabis Regulators Conference in California a few weeks ago, was even in California, which is arguably the most congested cultivation ecosystem in the world that has a huge number of producers. The last time I looked at the ratios, they had something like 8,500 licensed cultivators to roughly 1,200 to 1,500 stores. So massive asymmetry there. They've got some producers like who are producing millions of square feet of greenhouse grows. Massive environments there. But in the stores, there's still a lot of product being sold by small craft, high quality producers. And it's not, they're not being sold at fire sale prices. So I think it's worth understanding, and as a kind of just point of competitive consideration for our smaller producers, that scale does not guarantee success. And for discerning consumers, as consumers become more sophisticated, there's absolutely going to be a market for people who are looking for the highest quality product, who are looking for very specific genetics that aren't being, say, quote unquote, mass produced, who are looking for brands that just feel like they reflect and resonate with the identity of the consumer. And so, yes, we kind of understand the issue raised by this slide here, but I don't want to suggest that it is a foregone conclusion that there's not going to be a lot of room for people who are dialed in the way they're producing their products, who are effective in defining their brands and segregating themselves from the rest of the market, and who are efficient in ensuring that whatever price the product is selling at, that because the operations are efficient, they're able to maintain margins that allow them to be sustainable into the long term.
Yeah, thanks, John. For me, it's more about trying to understand the total capacity of canopy or square footage or production that each class of license can have, and how does that fit into the retail landscape.
Yep.
And the reason, my mind goes there, we looked at the retail slide and it's all about the number of stores and the revenue. But, you bring up California, or we could look at Michigan or several other states where there's become such an oversupply that the retail prices are so cheap. I mean, I just saw the 1 gram vapes in Michigan selling for $6 at the register. And so to me, it's a twofold problem. One, it is the concentration of retail stores that is a problem. But when you have a potential oversupply and the prices crash, now the retailers are also racing to the bottom with the discounts and the buy one, get one frees that, when Joe, you asked before, like, how much does it take to run a store? Like, they could be doing $6 million in revenue, but they could have bought $5 million worth of cannabis, right? And they have absolutely no margins left. So to me, this is like it's a balancing act, right? It's scales on both sides of the equation. And so that's why I'm, just trying to understand, what our options are here as we try to recommend licensing to balance this thing as we go forward.
Absolutely. And that was part of the reason why we want to highlight this, is we actually get into the final couple of slides kind of providing this overview. But I thought it was important to understand that there is this, that we are thinking about licensing on both sides of the ledger, both on the supply side and on the retail side. I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I've already made the point that pre-rolls make up a significant portion of the market. Here we're showing our concentrate sales, and just 2 points I wanted to make. Pre-rolls as a category in of itself, just raw flower, are doing quite well, but infused pre-rolls also make up more than half of our concentrate sales. There's very strong demand for that. Some of that might be folks who are extracting flower that they might not have been able to sell. If you didn't have a good harvest, you can extract from that and turn it into other products. And so not only are pre-rolls a strong category, but there's also a value proposition there, because we are generally seeing, on a 1-for-1 basis, that whether it's an infused pre-roll or infused blunt, you're able to charge nearly 2x or more of the cost of an uninfused one. So another potential way in which our producers may be able to extend both their product as well as drive some revenue from it is through turning flower into some of these value-added products that are clearly doing quite well in New York. So with all of that said, we want to now just kind of talk first about our supply side outlook and how we're thinking about the outlook for growth in this market. So essentially, we view this as a market that is going to be using 3 types of biomass coming out of our fields. There's going to be, let's call it the grade A flower. This is what's intended to be smoked. The flower that is sold in loose packages, 1/8, 1/4 ounces, and the pre-rolls that are uninfused and sold as smokable flower. That currently makes up around 45-46% of our market. The second category are the smokable concentrates, where this may be slightly lower quality flower, but still high enough quality that it can be sold to the discerning concentrate consumer, the wax, shatter, hashish, infused pre-roll consumer. We're taking flower that may not necessarily be smokable quality, it may not have that glass feel, but is well suited to make extracts out of. So again, a higher quality extract. And then you've got other categories like edibles, vapes, the non-smokable extracts, the topicals and tinctures, where this is primarily using isolated compounds, the isolated THC, isolated CBD, mixing a few other things. But here, the quality of the product, the input flower isn't necessary, it doesn't need to be as high because you're stripping it down to its individual molecule to produce these value-added products. And so that will also include lower quality flower. It includes the leaf, the trim, the stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor as you're getting the glass-ready products together. So we see the demand for all three of these categories growing over time, with some adjustment in our model for the fact that smokable flower will be, it's going to remain a very strong category, but its share of the market is going to decrease a little over time. Earlier I said we're currently at about 45%. By 2030, we're expecting to be at about 40% of smokable flower being share of market. And then these value-added products, both the concentrates and categories like edibles, are going to continue to grow quite strongly. So those each will grow, say 2 to 5% going into the end of the decade. And so, we're expecting that this market will be ingesting roughly 2 million pounds of raw cannabis, through the end of the decade. And that's a lot of cannabis product. We're expecting there to be a lot of cannabis grown, processed and sold in New York. And obviously, we have some assumptions in there about the efficiency of processing and how much extract you can get out of the biomass over time. But if the technological advancements and innovation we have seen over the last decade are any indication, I wouldn't be surprised if the innovators have found ways to get even further to produce more and more efficiently over time. So one of the wild cards here is just the rate at which this market innovates launched over time. So referential number, 2 million pounds of flower of biomass over time. Now, I apologize for the eye chart. I hope you all are able to see the table on screen. And I'll just give you the thumbnail kind of takeaway here. The takeaway number here is that based on the capacity that we have already licensed, one, we're assuming that we currently have 5 cultivators, 5 ROs who are licensed to produce and who are already selling into the AU market. By the end of the decade, top row of this table, we're assuming that only grows to about 10. So we're not assuming that every RO that has been licensed is going to be growing. We have our AUCCs. These are the people who've been serving the market to this point. To date, roughly had around 200 last year, have 170 who are kind of transitioning right now. By the end of the decade, we're expecting we'll have 210 folks from our current base of AUCC transitioning growers who become final adult use cultivators over time. We have already issued approximately 50 indoor cultivation licenses from folks who are in our December queue. And so this model is assuming we didn't issue any more cultivation licensing, but we factored in just what we've issued already so far. And based on the decision to license the entire November queue, there were 350 micro-business applicants in that November queue. We're assuming that in this model, roughly 300 of those will get licensed and maybe 250 of those will get operational. So based on just the commitment already made to the November queue that we are going to review that entire cohort, this estimate has us assuming that we'll get about 250 operational micro-business licenses from that November cohort by the end of 2030. If each of those licensees, we've built a model that we're happy to share that makes some assumptions about how much would be drawn from each of these types of producers. But suffice it to say, collectively, these producers conservatively could be producing over 3 million pounds of cannabis by the end of the decade, with each of these accounting for a portion of that. Now, the pink line, which looks like the pink section of the column, which is our AUCs, I understand will look like they account for a significant portion of our output. But I would just caution that, let's not just assume that because they have the ability to produce all of that, that is where the bulk of the sales are going to be coming from. So, we've seen in the preceding slide that on the larger package size, the ROs have captured some share of market there already. And so, this market is going to be competitive based on the amount of production capacity that has already been permitted. We are expecting that most of these licensees will continue to produce. And so by the end of the decade, we're expecting we will have over 500 cultivation licenses operational.
In the prior slide, you said that you think the demand is going to be 2 million pounds.
Yes, and so let's actually overlay the two against each other. So the first slide was how much output we can expect. The second slide is how much demand we expect to sell through. This slide shows the two together and the delta that we're expecting. The blue bar shows what we are expecting to need for our sell-through. The red bar is how much we're producing, and we'll be expecting to see a delta of roughly 1 million pounds by the time we get to 2030, based on the cultivation capacity that's already been authorized. We're expecting to see, at least currently, a 42% delta between production and sell-through by the time we get to 2030.
So based on what's already approved?
Already approved or already committed to.
Right. Based on what's already approved or committed to, there's going to be a million pounds extra.
That's right, Chair Bell.
Okay. All right. Can you finish up in 10 minutes or so?
I can.
Excellent. Because I want to just leave time for the conversation about our letter and the other.
Sure. So, based on everything we've discussed so far, I'll summarize the office's recommendations, at least preliminary recommendations, as follows. 1, the decision to license the November queue has meant that we're expecting to issue roughly 800 licenses based on our current trajectory, assuming everyone in the November queue who qualifies is getting one license. So of the roughly 2,000 applicants we had in the November queue, we're expecting to issue roughly 800 licenses from the November queue. We recognize that there's a lot of folks in the December queue. We had nearly 4,000 retail applicants there, and we want to ensure that there's, particularly because there's a lot of folks in the December queue who kind of made the intentional choice to wait and assess the marketing conditions before they applied. We want to account for the reality that there's a large and largely equity-based cohort in the December queue who are awaiting consideration. So our recommendation, our preliminary recommendation, is to issue 1,000 retail licenses from the December queue in acknowledgement of the fact that there's a lot of folks in that cohort who have not yet been considered. 2, to issue 100 more micro business licenses. Again, there's over 800 applicants who applied for micro businesses in the December queue. This is it's going to be a large cohort, but we're proposing considering at least issuing some micro business licenses from the December cohort. But specifically on cultivation, based on what we have just seen, the delta that we already have in place, we're not recommending issuing any more cultivation licenses until we at least have a better sense of the outlook and state of production moving forward. One of the things that we have learned from other jurisdictions is that when you have a hypersaturated market of production, cultivators generally don't reduce how much they produce. What ends up happening is they all produce maximally, believing what they'll be able to sell what they produce, and then you start seeing products seeping out of the back of the barns and falling off the back of trucks into the illicit market. We just want to avoid that as much as possible because of the public health and public safety issues it creates. For kind of speed of this conversation, because there are a few additional points I want to make, we're fairly comfortable that we can issue quite a number more processor licenses, and with the processors, yes, it's going to be a competitive market, but it doesn't necessarily add production. It's not bringing in new biomass, so there's the ability to support that. But we think that there's opportunity there to increase the number of type 1 processors to at least 150, and then to move all of this product around the state, we're recommending issuing up to 60 distribution licenses. I think the real crux here, the focus of this discussion largely has been around retail and cultivation, and I think that's appropriate because that's where the two pressure points I think are going to be felt most acutely. And so to recap, our recommendation on the retail side is 1,000 from the December queue, or the ability to support 1,000 more licenses wherever they may be coming from, beyond the 800 that we are expecting to issue from the November queue. And we are suggesting a moratorium on further cultivation licenses until we have a better bead on the outlook for our production. One additional important point we're making here: we understand that not every person who gets a license is going to be able to operationalize the business. Finding locations, raising capital, just kind of doing the business of cannabis is a very challenging thing. And so while these numbers are aggressive, here we will be talking about between retail, micro, and cards, a total of 2,500 licenses issued. We're estimating that roughly 500 of those folks aren't going to be able to open. So we would be looking at roughly 2,000 stores open by the time all of this is done. This is a bit of an eye chart, but the three green bars on the left are where New York currently is the tall bar, in that we have right now around 75,000 people, citizens per store open. Based on the 800 stores we expect to open, well, it's 800 licenses we expect to issue from the November queue, that would drop us to about 25,000 people per open store. If we were to get 2,000 retail doors open, it would put us closer to 10,000 people per store. And that puts us right in line with some of the most mature and competitive markets in the range of Colorado, Maine, and Michigan. In the most mature and hyper-competitive markets, we see roughly between 2,000 and 15,000 people, population per dispensary. And so with 2,000 doors and a 10,000 people per door range, New York would be estimated to be right in line with the states that are most mature and most competitive right now.
I do have a question on this one. So, the population that you're using to calculate these figures, is that based on current population, and does it incorporate projections around population? The reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking about the last 4 years where we saw a lot of population decrease unexpectedly. So how does this speak to that?
Great question. And this is a static view. It's based on our current population and not making any assumptions about population drift over time. If we end up having a significant exodus, I hope this is not going to be the case, but if we end up seeing significant population decline in New York over the coming decade, then that obviously is also going to implicate the level of saturation we're seeing, and it just drives us down closer to the Oregon, kind of New Mexico range potentially. A couple of quick points I'll close with, and because I do want to ensure that the board has sufficient time for the discussion. One is just licensing cadence based on where we are currently. So assuming here that we were trying to get to a total number of 2,000 licenses issued between now and when we get to that point. At our current capacity, I hadn't changed it for you, this is the slide. At our current capacity, we've been roughly averaging 100 to 150 licenses issued per month over time. So the orange bar is the cumulative total number of licenses issued, and we're saying that by June 2026, we would have those 2,000 stores issued. Here, we're assuming that as we get through the next season, we will quickly transition from issuing the final supply side licenses, because there's only a subset of those left, and most of our horsepower is going to drift to issuing retail licenses. So we're saying that as we're getting into mid 2025, not only are we transitioning from the November queue to the December queue as they're currently structured, but with the bulk of the licenses we're going to be issuing are going to be retail licenses. But even if we're assuming that we're going to be doing between 100 and 150 licenses per month issued and approved by the board, it is going to take us until mid 2026 to get them all done. So I say that because it's a really important point to understand that this isn't going to be a flip switching moment where all of these licenses are approved and operational simultaneously. This is going to be a long, drawn out process. Critically important for folks to understand that and plan their resources accordingly. That this is going to be a long, protracted process. If our target number ends up being 2,000 licenses, it is going to take us till mid 2026 to get there. Okay. Three closing, just quick
Hey,
snapshot
John?
views. I don't need to belabor. Yes.
John, it's Nikki, and I have a question for you on the market share side before you move on to the lessons learned. I really appreciate all this data, but I just wanted to ask a couple of follow-up questions in terms of like market share. So love to have a little bit more data on in terms of, you know, who the maybe top 5 cultivators and processes are in terms of their market share. You know, there's been concerns raised already about multi-state operators. So I'm curious if there's data on brands, because I'll be honest, I went to a dispensary last week and almost every shelf was a brand that I've purchased in Massachusetts, Colorado, California. So I don't know if that's coming up, but I would love to see sort of the market share about, you know, the you know, top 5 folks in New York currently, but also if there's data on, you know, MSO brands versus, you know, folks who are transitioning from legacy or who are, you know, no pun intended, like homegrown New Yorkers who are launching their brands here.
It's a good question. I didn't include it in the slide just partly out of brevity, but I can just share some data and we can get this information to you. We actually shared this at our CCB meeting. So first, there's nearly 500 brands, 490 by our count, that are currently operating in New York. So that number has increased significantly from the beginning of the year when we had less than 200. Two, there is a bit of brand concentration that's happening. So of those 490, the top 10 brands have roughly 32% of market share. The top 20 have 46% of the market share. So the top 10 brands have a third of the market. The top 20 have 50% of the market.
Can you either before or at the next meeting include some of that in
Absolutely.
your next presentation?
Certainly.
Okay. All right.
And
What
then
else?
just really quickly, a couple of things that I think speak to the concerns that have been voiced and expressed so far. One is around the supply side impact of cultivation saturation. This is data from Colorado. That state has seen the price of flower fall from $2,000 a pound at the beginning of 2015 to roughly $650 a pound, a 67% decline in price per pound as of last month. Trim has fallen 71%, very intense competition there, even though there's a bit of a surge during the pandemic period. Similarly, these are 3 different markets where we're seeing in blue the price of a gram in Colorado, in red the price of a gram in Massachusetts, in green the price of an ounce in Michigan, and the data speaks for itself. 75% in the decline in the price of a gram in Colorado, 64 in Massachusetts, 61 for an ounce in Michigan. And I'll just note that the compression is happening on a more aggressive timeline. It took Colorado 120 months, 6 years for that compression of 75% to happen. It took Michigan 51 months for that compression to happen. It took Massachusetts 51 months. It took Michigan 32 months. And Michigan has been very aggressive in its licensing. 3, we are seeing declines in licensing happening in the most saturated market. Oklahoma has seen a 45% decline in the number of licensed businesses because of the number of people who are crashing out. The scale of kind of destruction that happens, the kind of capital that ends up being impacted by these contractions. In California, it's a 32%. It's a 30% decline. In Colorado, it's a 21% decline in licenses. We are seeing even Colorado, which has been largely viewed as a well-regulated, largely stable market. 20% of the businesses have closed their doors in the last couple of years. It's an acute impact nationally. We're down about 11%, and that's even with states like New York, New Jersey, some of the East Coast markets, Pennsylvania, growing the number of licenses. The national trend has been for contraction and consolidation. And one of the important impacts of that is that you end up with a lot of businesses who don't pay their bills. They close out before they can, they end up either going bankrupt or closing business before they don't meet their financial obligations. Currently, based on a recent estimate by Whitney Economics, there's $3.8 billion in outstanding debts that have not been paid. That's massively disruptive for the business owners that are holding these unpaid invoices, and it ends up cascading inevitably to the cultivators because the processor will take the product and not be able to repay them because the processor doesn't get paid by the retailer. We've seen distributors, like California's largest distributor went out of business with nearly $200 million in unpaid bills. This becomes a real issue in hypersaturated markets. And then finally, the impact on tax revenue. In Colorado, the amount of tax revenue being generated by the legal industry has fallen 39% since its peak, from $400 million 3 years ago to $250 million now. This is important because if you think about the way in which the money that is being generated by the regulated market is supposed to be used, in Colorado, they had prioritized building schools, drug treatment and mental health program support, after-school programs. That's a lot of money that they have built models around, that they build budgets around, that's not coming in. And so the cascading implication of getting a market to hypersaturation, then having the crash out that happens after, ends up acutely impacting the money that is intended to support these social programs that this industry was intended to support through its revenues. So I'll close with that. I know it's been a lot, and turn over to the board for the discussion.
John,
Can we
thank
show
you.
this slide every week?
Can do the black presentation.
Yeah. John, thank you. I don't know where we would be without you. I'm not just saying that, but this information is critically important, and we appreciate so much the work that you did. And I think you know, some of this is not. I think a lot of this has been predictable. I remember having a conversation 6-7 years ago with a retail operator in an affluent area of Colorado. I was asking him about his retail operation, and he said to me, the money is not going to be in retail, it's going to be in branding. And the people in the business who are in the business are focused on branding right now, not owning retail locations. So I think even in Colorado several years ago, even anecdotally, people understood what was going to happen to the market. And I'm now going to turn this over to Pete Schaefer. I want to just say that, you know, the purpose of this advisory board is in the statute is to advise the Cannabis Control Board on their regulations. And this board is set up and populated with people from all parts of the industry and the market and government agencies and communications and other areas, specifically to have people who have in-depth knowledge to share. So we are very fortunate to have Alan Gandelman and Pete Schaefer as part of this advisory board because they have a very sophisticated understanding of the marketplace. And we are going to be sharing a draft letter that was sent to all the CAB members prior to the meeting to see if we can agree on recommendations in this letter that we can send to the CCB to underscore the CAB's view based on, in part, our collective knowledge and experience, and also the data that John just presented to help be stewards of this market. So Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, John. I think this is really just opening remarks meant to trigger a discussion. And I think it's our responsibility to merge the spirit of the MRTA, to Ebro's point, to merge the data that we hear from John, to merge data that we see from third-party independent economists, i.e. the Whitney report, look at number of stores per population, and merge that all together, as it's our responsibility from the CAB, and look at all of those things combined, including proximity, waivers, and just open this up for a discussion on what we think the market can bear. So to kick that off, this letter is really just a guideline for the conversation, in the hopes that at the end of this discussion, we can come to terms with what might be a good recommendation from the CAB to the CCB, specifically regarding licensing. So I really just want to open it up for conversation, discussion, and see if we can collectively come to terms. There's 3 points at the end of the draft letter that are pretty specific for recommendations. And we tried to really get to a total number, and it does take into consideration the percentage of open rate. So this number of 1,600 wasn't just arbitrary. It was taking and merging all of those points of data. It's really a data-driven conversation to try to give the CCB some guidance on what we collectively think the market can bear. So from that, I'll just open it up. Hope everybody's had a chance to read the letter, and we can use it as a working document to try to come to some consensus.
So it's Nikki. I actually I want to kick it off with a clarifying question, because we've heard about the independent report by Whitney Economics, and I'd like a little bit more background on who they are, if this was an OCM commission study, and if not, who commissioned it and who financed it, because I think if we're including something in our official capacity as CAB members, we should just make sure we're all being very cautious of the optics of that, and that, we're doing things in a nonpartisan fashion.
I can appreciate that, but I'm not able to answer that question. I just don't know enough about Whitney themselves, or who they were funded by, but I took that information with a grain of salt as a third-party economist organization. That's really all I know. Does anybody else have any?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. One, it was not commissioned by the OCM. That it was independently done. Two, a thumbnail about Whitney Economics. They've been a long time kind of economists and / analysts in the cannabis sector. They've been doing this a lot for a lot of different jurisdictions, both at the national and at the state and sub-state level. I don't know whether it was a commissioned report or an independently generated one. They do a combination of both sponsored and ad hoc reports, but I don't know what the genesis of this one specifically was. I will note in our review of it, one of the assumptions made there was for a higher average revenue per store than we are assuming in our assumptions. And so part of the reason why their number is a little bit lower than we think the market can bear is because they're expecting, or they were assuming a slightly higher average revenue per store. But if you account for that piece, then our models are roughly similar in that the truism remains in place. Truism remains true that as you increase the number of stores, you reduce the average revenue per store.
I have a question. Can you just do me a favor and tell me what is the difference between what the letter is recommending and the recommendations we just heard from the agency?
The 1,600 number, which is really the number in question, would be the total number of licenses awarded. Then to account for percentage of open rate, and then to add in existing stores. So in a nutshell, theoretically, that 1,600 number would actually be a little bit more aggressively lower than, a little bit lower than what John might recommend in his presentation.
Yeah, I guess, I just want to be on the record. It's very clear from the data that we just saw that we have an obligation to make sure that we are ensuring market stabilization, protecting the retailers. I have the same concerns as a majority of the CAB members, including Ebro, about the social equity applicants and licensees and making sure that they're protected. I also want to commend Acting Director Reed and John. You know, I haven't seen this much data since I started on the CAB, so that was a lot of data to take in. The one piece I always, you know, I would like to see more of is the public health impact data. Even the data that we saw around youth use was from 21-22, which was in the middle of a pandemic. So I think we should take that into consideration. I do think that the public health team at OCM is doing a fabulous job, and I hope to see data like that in the future. But I think it's just more of a testament to the fact that we need more public health data, more timely data around youth use and unintentional exposures, of course. And if the market is having that same impact, I hope that when we do have more timely data, we'll see the same kind of things. So, and then also the municipalities' preparedness in terms of taking on additional retailers and licensees. I do have concerns about that as well. Yeah, that's my pitch, but I think the letter is well written. I do think it looks good. It mentions public health. I'd like to see a little bit more language in there about public health. There is a lot of data out of California, particularly in regard to what the impact on the health of communities is due to density of additional retailers in communities.
So that's a good point. On that point, would you want to put something as a recommendation as it relates to proximity?
I think density,
Okay.
proximity and density of retail establishments, and just making sure that we're protecting the health of communities. And that our recommendation for the 1,600 retail licenses factors that in as well.
Thank you. Any other points of discussion?
Can I just make a recommendation for, this is Nikki, for number 1, where it says we'll revisit the licensing recommendation with third-party market study. I would greatly encourage us to consider maybe using Rockefeller Institute as a resource. They have done significant research on cannabis. Chair Bellick, I feel like you love the SUNY system, so this would fit right into that. So
I on the Rockefeller Institute Legal Law Committee, so I'm a big fan of Rockefeller Institute, and Bob Megna is currently running it and does a fantastic job.
Great. So maybe we can make a recommendation to update the language that says, you know, that we'll revisit licensing recommendation in partnership with Rockefeller Institute, and if such they are not able to support our requests, then we'll put out an RFP for a third-party research or entity.
Thank you.
I just want to mention quickly, Sarah, to your point, we had a conversation as an agency with OMH the other day around vulnerable populations and public policy data. So I'm looking forward to in next year potentially convening with the O agencies to discuss where the intersections are and where the concerns are.
Turn it over to you, Joe.
And also, Nikki, just so you know, there in the large OCM report that came out a couple of months ago, that I think was a required reporting from OCM. One of the recommendations was to work with higher education institutions around the state. And I have asked Pat to, at one of our next CAB meetings, convene some of the higher education leaders to come and talk about how we can continue to work together with them. So, okay. So hearing no other questions or comments, I am going to request a motion to approve sending the letter to the Cannabis Control Board with a modification with respect to the Rockefeller Institute and
Recommendation to add proximity density language relating to health
Our
and health
decision
and
being
safety.
based on public health.
okay. Can I have a motion, please?
All motion.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, anyone opposed? All right, the motion carries. The letter to the Cannabis Control Board is approved on the number of adult use licenses to issue. And I would request that Pat, you work to have that letter finalized and sent to the Cannabis Control Board, and we encourage them to read it and rely on it in their decision-making. And thank you again to everybody involved in the process of getting that letter done. And we are now going to move on to more updates from the Office of Cannabis Management. And I am now going to turn it over to our Executive Deputy Director of Economic Development and Research and the Acting Chief Equity Officer, Tabitha Robinson, for a social and economic equity update.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. I'll try to move quickly through these. First, our social and economic equity numbers. If you recall, the statutory goal is that of 50%. We continue to surpass that goal with 54% of adult use licenses are C-owned. Now, the numbers below represent licenses issued this week and their distribution across C. Usually, these numbers are speak to all of the adult use licenses issued, but this is just a snapshot. This time, we're offering a snapshot to highlight our amended way of collecting data. So we have minority-owned businesses, 38%, women-owned businesses, 36%, service-disabled veterans at 2%, distressed farmers at 8%, communities disproportionately impacted at 16%. The way that we have collected data throughout the licensing process has generally only afforded applicants and licensees to be counted under a single C category. And this was in part because of the operational efficiency of moving these applications quickly in order to quickly roll out licensing. Now we've worked with our ITS partners to build out a capacity for our C licensees to qualify for more than one category. So if you are both from a CDI and a service-disabled veteran, you would be included in both of those categories as opposed to just one. The biggest change here that we've seen from previous CAB meetings is this CDI number at 16%. It's something we're very pleased about internally as it more accurately captures the direction that our licensing is heading in and the people that we have, the businesses that we have awarded these licenses to. Next slide, please. Let's think about social and economic equity across the supply chain. We see fairly equal distribution across the various license types, and I'll show more detail on this next. But the biggest highlight here is that there's a lot of C activity amongst the microbusiness license and amongst the retail license. This comports with a lot of what we see across the nation. Generally, we see in other states pretty low activity amongst cultivators and processors. We're happy here that the supply chain, the supply side of the supply chain does have a lot of C representation. Now, on the next slide, we offer a breakdown. Next slide, please. We offer a breakdown of the various C categories by license type. I know that this is something that has been requested by CAB in the past, so we're very pleased to provide this information. And the goal here is to really look at each of the license types and say, what kind of C participation are we seeing exactly? When we look, for example, at CDIs, we see a lot more CDI representation amongst distributors and the microbusiness. That's really exciting. We had coming in assumptions and questions around CDI's participation on the supply side, so especially distribution, but noting that that is equal to microbusiness is a good sign. Amongst distressed farmers, we see, no surprise, a lot of distressed farmers who are cultivators. That tracks. We see a lot of distressed farmers who are distributors. What I find really interesting here is not too many distressed farmers are processing. They seem to be sort of skipping that step in terms of interest there. So that's something we want to dive into more. Women-owned businesses are strong across all of the license types. Less participation amongst distribution, but again, still relatively high there. Minority-owned businesses, pretty good performance across all of the license types, mostly in retail, on the retail dispensary side with 50%. Again, that tracks with what we see nationally. And service-disabled veterans tend to hover amongst the microbusiness license. Now, we recently were at VetCon. I'll discuss that in a later slide. But given some conversations that we've had amongst the veteran community, that also answers a lot of the early assumptions we had around what types of services our SDVOB businesses are interested in participating in, and how can they best use their skill set to serve this market. Next slide, please. This slide looks at our TPIs by license category. So again, I want to highlight that here we're talking about a true party of interest. We are not speaking about who owns the most of a different company. Our true party of interest, if you recall, includes several categories, including those who have a financial, controlling, or ownership interest in a business. So we're talking about your executive staff of your licensed business. We're talking about your equity shareholders of your licensed business. And we're talking about those who would otherwise have a financial interest, for example, via goods and services agreement. Overwhelmingly, you see really strong participation amongst white TPIs in the industry, and that's across all of the license types, especially on the supply side. When you look at the participation of Black TPIs, heavy concentration in amongst the microbusiness and retail dispensary licenses that tracks with what we've seen with the broader minority-owned business trend as well. Asian participation is also very heavy in retail dispensary business and other minorities in retail dispensary. So overall, it seems, and this matches what I shared previously, that minority TPIs in cannabis generally tend towards the retail dispensary license and then the microbusiness license after that. When we look at ethnicity, speaking specifically around Hispanic TPIs, we see pretty even participation across all license types, right? And that's pretty unique. We don't see that when we look, for example, at race, even amongst Black, white, Asian racial categories. You don't see such even distribution across all license types, the way that you see with Hispanic TPIs. Next slide, please. Veteran engagement. So the office for the past 9 months to almost a year has been running an interagency veteran task force. This task force consists of individuals from within OCM. We have about 20-something participants across the agency, including veterans themselves, as well as people who feel closely connected to the veteran community. We also have a number of other agencies participate with us. So Department of Labor, Department of Health, Office of General Services, amongst other agencies. And we meet regularly to discuss veteran needs, ways that we can support the veteran community and provide them with information. Last week, we participated in VetCon along with our external affairs team. VetCon stands for Veterans in Economic Transition Conference, and it's the largest state conference devoted to serving the veteran community. While we were there, it was a wonderful opportunity for us to have conversations with organizations, nonprofits, and other state agencies around how we can best serve this community. One of the things that we heard there is that overall, there's a lot of opportunity for veteran-specific technical assistance, and there are providers for such assistance across other industries. There is, however, a major gap in the cannabis industry, as I'm sure we can all imagine. And so there's work to be done here around, and OCM really sees an opportunity here to support veteran-specific technical assistance programs. Now, the ROs, as part of their transition into the adult use market, are responsible for paying a special licensing fee set by the statute. Part of that fee goes towards programs like this technical assistance one. It generally serves our incubation programs, and this veteran-specific technical assistance program is a wonderful way in which we can utilize such fees to really address the specific skill set that our veterans have. As I showed in the previous slide, they're really strong in the micro business. So we're thinking about ways that we can build upon that unique skill set that the veterans have and really support them as part of our broader C initiatives. While we were at VetCon, we distributed a document that you'll see here on the right of the screen, and a QR code can take you to it. And this document provides information specific to the vet. So questions about, will I lose my benefits if I consume cannabis? Will I lose my benefits if I obtain a license? What does employment look like? What can my employer do or not do if I consume cannabis? How can I consume responsibly? What about my security clearance, right? There are particular needs of that community, and this document is one of the first steps we're taking to speak directly in a very public way to the veteran community. I just have one more slide before I wrap up. Next slide, please. Our retail accelerator program with our academy, John spoke on this a bit earlier. This program is coming to an end. If you recall, the agency worked with our academy in 2023. I'm like, what year are we in? In 2023, to provide educational services to CARD and retail services in particular. We've since expanded the program to include 750 CARD as well as social and economic equity participants. And this is a fantastic program with our partner, our academy, a 501c3 nonprofit that has extensive experience in this industry. And they've been able to provide our licensees with 90 free educational sessions, 92 hours of teaching time, one-on-one engagement. We're at 650 hours of that. They're getting pro forma models prepared with mentors. They're getting that sort of guidance and hand-holding that we need as an industry and as a state that's doing adult use cannabis for the first time. This has been a really strong resource, and we're really grateful for the work that they've been able to do on the ground. Now, the program is coming to an end, and licensees have access to the live virtual hours and the recordings and the coursework until December 15th. If you need access to it and you are a licensee, you don't yet have that, please, you can reach out to c@ocm.ny.gov, and we'll direct you, put you in the right direction. You can also reach out to This Is Our Academy at this email down here on the screen. Now, again, this is coming to an end, so we encourage our licensees to tap in. I also just want to close and say that this program we were able to launch with our academy is the largest cannabis education program in the country, and it has made a profound difference on what we see in the market. You know, when John is sharing his market updates, a lot of what we're seeing are the direct results of our incubation programming and our educational programming, such as this one. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions before I pass it along to Matt.
If I could just make one comment and one request.
Yes, please.
The comment is, well, first, thank you very much. And it's good to see the progress that's being reported, but I think it's clear we need to do more in the non-retail license categories. So we look forward to anything we can do to help and encourage more to get more diversity in the distribution and cultivation and processing. And the request I had is at a future meeting, or maybe the next meeting, can we get information or have a conversation about the employees and also the vendors that the licensees are using to see if these licensees are driving dollars back into the communities, and the diversity is extending to the employees and also to, the electricians and tradespeople and other vendors that the locations are using.
Chair Bellick, that's a great set of comments, and it's something that we internally are very curious in tracking as well. I'll check with our data team in terms of, what data we ultimately have that we can pull for that. As you mentioned, tracking employees, I'm thinking specifically, the extent to which we can show the different levels amongst employees, right? We understand that amongst an organization's workforce, there are different positions and different roles. And so it would be really interesting to see what that looks like across the different roles. Also thinking about the vendors, and specifically the vendors that would qualify as a TPI. So let's say, for example, you're a licensee and you have a plumber who comes in and checks your pipes. And that plumber, you have a goods and services agreement with them. They might not pass the thresholds under our TPI regulations to sort of get on our map and get on our radar. So data for that plumber would be difficult to find, but we might be able to find it for other goods and services providers that do, let's say, have a larger financial interest within that license. So yes, definitely we'll work on getting that. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments before we move on to the Community Reinvestment Fund update? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Wilson, who is going to give us what I think will be an exciting update on our Community Reinvestment Program.
Thank you, Chair Bellick. I want to start by saying that the application window for the Community Reinvestment Program remains open, and the deadline has been extended until December 18th at 5 p.m. We received over 200 questions during the Q&A period. Applicants often depend on the answers that we're able to provide in order to craft their proposals. And due to the large volume of questions we received, we needed extra time to complete and vet those responses. In order to balance the ledger and afford applicants the same amount of time after we had provided answers, we added an additional 5 days to the application window. The Office of General Services, which again hosts OCM and is hosting the Community Reinvestment Program procurement, published the most up-to-date addendum on November 27th that includes answers to the questions that were received. I also want to just inform the CAB of a couple other changes that were made in that addendum. Most of are small in nature. One is we added a missing addendum that was related to MWBE and EEO requirements. In scoring applications, we have revised our definition of desperate scores as 10 points or more. Originally, desperate scores would be applications where the spread between highest and lowest score was 20 points. We have narrowed that to create a bit more inter-rater reliability between evaluators. We removed a component of the general liability insurance requirement, specifically the product's completed operations aggregate. This presented challenges for another OCM grant opportunity and was likely to cause an unnecessary burden on community reinvestment program awardees. We updated the due date again, December 18th at 5 p.m. We clarified some instructions about uploading signed addenda for anyone who is watching. The Office of General Services requires that applicants sign and acknowledge that they have seen all the addendum issued for the RFA, and we have added instructions about where and how to upload those documents in OCM e-grants. And finally, we removed a confusion that had emerged about what we would accept as overhead. And we have now just clearly capped that at 10% or $10,000 of the total grant amount. I also want to provide the CAB just a more general update on the preparations we're making inside OCM to evaluate applications. While we won't know the number of applications submitted until after the due date, we can see that more than 600 organizations have registered in OCM e-grants and that many hundreds of applications have been started. On the whole, this is fantastic news. I think it means we're getting the word out there and there is a lot of interest in this opportunity. But of course, the evaluation effort grows in scale as the number of submitted applications increases. As specified in the RFA, every application will be scored independently by 3 people. We are recruiting more than 30 individuals from across the agency in preparation for that evaluation effort. We're preparing guidance documents, in-depth trainings to prepare the evaluators, and we will also provide ongoing support throughout the evaluation period as questions and concerns arise. And then finally, for anyone watching, I encourage applicants to review the most up-to-date RFA. And if I have neglected to mention earlier in this presentation, the due date is December 18th at 5 p.m. And I also want to remind applicants that you must pre-qualify in the statewide financial system by the application deadline. So for anyone who has started an application in OCM e-grants, please check your status of your SFS pre-qualification and take the necessary steps to be pre-qualified by the application deadline. And finally, I encourage anyone watching to please visit OCM's website via the QR link there. You can find a link to the RFA, guidance and support documents, and how to apply, and some navigation assistance for the OCM e-grants. That concludes my presentation here. Happy to take any questions and concerns. Otherwise, I believe I will pass to John for an update on seed to sale.
Thank you, Matt.
Before you do that, John, I just want to acknowledge that Chair of the CCB, Tremaine Wright, is with us. Hi, good to see you.
Hello.
Thank you. Just a quick update on the seed to sale system. We are moving full speed ahead to implement this CT sales system that's going to provide us the ability to track every product in our ecosystem from the time it is a seed in the ground to the time it ends up in a consumer's basket at the retail store. In service of that transition, and this is going to be a significant undertaking over the coming months, the office, in partnership with our CT sales solution provider, BioTrack, have scheduled 6 webinars that will be made available and accessible to all of our licensees. You should have actually already received the first emails about these. But between the first, which begins next Tuesday, December 17th, through the final one, which will be hosted on January 23rd, we'll be having a market vertical specific webinar, including for third-party integrators, cultivators, testing facilities, manufacturers, retailers, and a second one for the third-party integrators, just to provide some orienting context and some critical information to help folks as you begin to transition your businesses to these systems. This is going to be a really critical part of the regulatory process moving forward. And we urge all of our licensees to attend or have their representatives attend these sessions, because this is certainly one of the cases where you don't want to wait until the night before your homework is due to try and flip this on. There's going to be some technical requirements. We want to make sure you understand both what we're collecting and why. And these webinars, which will be available for replay, we'll be hosting them on the website, will be a great place to get that information. So look out, check your inboxes and look out for further information about this. But the first webinar for the platforms that, for the third-party platforms that are going to be plugging into Seeds to Sale is going to be held on Tuesday, December 17th at 1 p.m. And we look forward to working with you through the course of this deployment.
Thank you, John. Before we close, I wanted to do 2 things. First, I wanted to thank all the members of the CAB who've expressed an interest in helping to form and being a part of our new environmental sustainability subcommittee. We have quite a bit of interest, and we will have some more information to you soon. Also, I want to acknowledge one of our retail licensee owners, Matt Robinson from Legacy Dispensaries, who I was fortunate enough to go to the opening of. And Matt, I didn't know if there was anything, appreciate you coming here to support the work of the CAB. I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to say before we close out the meeting, but let me bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to the control board and the advisory board for just having me here today and just giving us this opportunity to speak and say something. I'm not going to be long, I'm going to be very brief. The advisory board did very well today on a lot of the stuff they brought up. Those are definitely concerns of retailers. John did a great job answering them. Really good, really informational. A lot of stuff that nobody really understood or knew came about today. So thank you for that, and we appreciate that. I did have a couple of things that I still want to sort of bring up and have questions about. The tax portion, allowing the adult use dispensaries to waive the medical tax when medical customers come in with a medical ID. I'm not asking to vertically integrate. I'm not asking to process, cultivate, or do anything outside of my tier, but I think that would be appropriate. It would be equal. It would help in our playing field. That's going to be a major thing going forward in the future when you say you have 11 current ROs or whatever it may be, with another 9 or 6 coming along. They're going to be close to dispensaries. They're going to have an advantage in not having that tax. That's going to be a major thing. Also, I wanted to talk about something that I know is being done. I think it's sitting on the governor's desk, but just making it so we can do our taxes yearly instead of quarterly. I mean, quarterly is just a headache. It drags our time, and we're trying to be successful. You know, we're trying to stay up to date on what's going on and doing the quarterly taxes. Though everything seems easy, it takes time to make sure that everything is correct. So switching that to yearly instead of quarterly is going to be a major thing. Also, on-site consumption, as time goes and we sort of stabilize the market, which is starting to happen, which will happen over the next 2 years, I'm assuming. we're gonna start moving towards other things as far as on-site consumption. Having a good plan in place for that is gonna be very, very important. Municipalities aren't gonna understand the complexities of having on-site consumption and allowing people to potentially smoke inside of a building where in a state, it's illegal to smoke in a building. So that's something that you guys are gonna have an uphill battle with, that you should start planning if you're not already, and I know you guys are working hard and diligently, but start planning for that in the future as well. There's gonna be a lot of issues with that. A lot of stuff is gonna come about it. I'm not gonna get into like a lot of other things, but those are just some of the things that are my concerns. So thank you very much for having me here today. And I appreciate everybody and all the work that the OCM does.
Thank you, and thank you again for coming. And I want to acknowledge
Joe?
also my friend Joe Rossi, who's been working hard on that legislation and at Parkside Strategies. With that,
Chair,
Joe.
Chair,
Hello,
Chair.
hello, hello.
You've got, there's on the New York City side, we've got two questions, one from Mickey, one
Okay.
for June. So do you want to go first, June? You want me to ask the question?
No, go ahead, I'm making
Okay.
a comment.
Okay, so just a question on the seed to sale system. You know, I have a question for John or anyone from the OCM team. But obviously, you know, I can't be the only member of the board who's heard concerns about the effects of inversion on the market. So would just love an update on how the seed to sale system is going to address that. And if there's going to be a task force in partnership with the seed to sale task force going live to make sure that all the products being sold in New York are New York grown, both literally and figuratively.
So maybe I'll just start and welcome other comments from OCM staff. But part of the reason why we're so excited and so keen to get the system operational is because it just strengthens our regulatory compliance basis, our ability to ensure compliance adherence. You know, without the seed to sale system in place, really we're relying on the licensees to tell us what they have, how much they grew, where it's coming from, et cetera. And so if you have a seed to sale system in place, it certainly reduces the ability for there to be immaculate conception, because theoretically the tags that will be issued to each of the plants will follow those plants through maturity, and then you can start to understand, well, you know, how is it possible that 100,000 pounds emerged out of a field that had 10 plants in it? So we see this as a really critical tool to support our efforts in monitoring the flow of product through our ecosystem. You know, we recognize that, you know, it is additive, but it is also going to need to be done in coordination with a very robust kind of human capital-based compliance adherence effort. You know, we will have the personnel being sent to farms, processors, just to make sure things are there and appropriately accounted for. But we're very optimistic that the combination of the seed to sale system being implemented, the additional resources that we're dedicating toward compliance will ensure that the product being sold in our stores are grown, bred, and manufactured right here in the state of New York.
Dr. Chen.
Great. That's awesome, John. Thanks. I'm excited to see the seed to sale system implementation, since it really provides a traceable data on products and consumer behavior, which is essential for research. And I also want to thank the OCM for ongoing monitoring of cannabis use among minors. I echo Sarah's sentiment. I think public health team's effort in tracking this issue is key. But I want to note, you know, for the last year, our focus has been on the adult use program. And the medical cannabis program faces critical challenges as patients leave. So we have local health providers recommending patients just walk into the closest dispensary. We have existing ROs closing and consolidating. We also have these newly licensed ROs entering an adult use dominated market. And all this is risking the medical program stability. So I really want to take actions to safeguard the medical cannabis program. While the adult use program has gained so much of our attention, we can't let the medical program fall because patients are counting on us. And I'm also expressing the concerns of the Medical Cannabis Advisory Council, the MCAC. And this is the team of 13 dedicated health providers who share these critical concerns about the program's stability and the impact on patients. So I do want to urge the CAB and the CCB to support any efforts that strengthen health outcomes, advance research, enhance public safety, any robust data collection on both patient and consumer outcomes. So I'm looking at both medical and adult use program. It's critical to these goals to guide clinical practices and inform public health initiatives. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Chin. And I think we can all say that we are fully aligned on that mission to continue to strengthen, preserve, and advance the medical cannabis program here in New York. I expect you will be seeing some robust proposals coming out of the office in collaboration with our partners to ensure we can achieve that. Nothing yet that we're discussing since these proposals are under development, but we are fully aligned that there's an opportunity here, and we want to make sure that this program remains strong and vibrant well into the future.
Thank you, John. And I trust you'll involve Dr. Chin and her subcommittee and the CAB as you're developing those proposals.
Absolutely.
Okay. With that, I would like to thank all of the CAB members for coming and participating in the meeting, both in person and via live stream. I'd like to thank the staff at OCM, Tabitha, Lila, Matt Wilson, Pat, John. Thank Interim Executive Director Reed for participating and also showing up, and thank Chair Wright for being here to be part of the conversation. The time for the next meeting, location, and live stream link will be on our website, cannabis.ny.gov. And a recording of today's meeting and the minutes and a transcript will be posted there as well. With that, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Excellent. Does anybody object? Okay. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Happy holidays.